drizzling, it's nice, and we still need water. Because of the rain, I walked out. I left my car without my yarmulke, so I'll deal with it. We'll just deal with it today. No problem, Maureen. It's okay. I think we can handle it. I think we can manage for one day.
You know what? You can wear my beret. Oh, two things. First of all,
Yes, I did. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay, so we'll say happy birthday to him. Sure. There was something I was going to ask you, and I don't remember.
oh, well, maybe it'll come to you.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, when do we stop for Passover?
You know what? I could look it up. I'll look it up.
Do we have class next week for sure?
I think so.
Okay.
Passover.
She'll check it.
Let me check the schedule.
Okay.
When is it? A week from today. 2 weeks is Passover, but we're usually. Okay, so we're
Do we
usually
have
off
class?
the week before.
So probably we don't have class next week.
I don't know.
Probably.
Check with Susie. She's the main.
Can I close this door, Rabbi?
Yes, please.
So, Rabbi, the 5th and the 12th that we're off.
So I guess we're off next week.
No, we're here. I don't.
No,
What's the-
next week is gotta be the 5th, isn't it?
No, I think no. I don't think so.
Okay.
So just a brief announcement. I just
5th and the 12th. Okay.
we're going to be off on April 5th and April 12th for the Passover holiday. So we're coming next week. So next week, and then we'll go on a spring break, I guess you would call it, but it's Passover break. Okay. Am I going to Miami? Oh, that's right. I used to be Fort Lauderdale, you know. Hey, that sounds good. I'm not dressed or undressed for it.
May I have the mic?
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so today we are going to Greece. Greece is going to take us 2 classes for sure. There's a lot of history and also a lot of peripheral history that's really great for us to talk about and learn along the way. Peripheral history meaning things that happened slightly outside that influenced what happened inside. Okay, so before we start, has anybody has anybody been to Greece? Oh, cool. All right. So give us the 2-minute version of.
We spent 14 days in Greece. We spent about 14 days in Greece about 7 or 8 years ago. And there was once a thriving Jewish population, as you well know. And it's almost non-existent now. And we did visit the one Jewish synagogue that still exists in Athens. And we visited the one synagogue that still exists in Athens, and it took us forever to find it. It's hidden in a little part of the city away from the city center, and it had a wonderful museum.
My closest girlfriend is Sephardic, and when I went to Greece, I went to the Isle of Rhodes and was at the synagogue there, and the parents' last name was on the synagogue, Soriano, and we loved that man. He was 93 when he died. He knew at least 5 languages, including, what do you call it? Ladino, thank you very much. And the other thing I want to say about Greece had nothing to do with Jewish, but I wanted to go there because I read this book about the discovery of Troy. And it was discovered by a man named Henry Schliemann. Were you going to talk about that? Oh, okay. So because it was such an exciting book, he was married at the late age of 40 to an 18-year-old and brought her to Turkey in order to excavate for Troy, with the promise to the Turkish government that he would, if he found it and all the gold that was there, that he would never bring it out of Turkey. Well, the man lied, and he found Troy, and in the middle of the night took all the gold and relics that he could find, put them on a ship, and got them to Greece. And that's the reason I wanted to go to see this discovery. And he had. Did you see the Mask of Agamemnon? No. So I wanted to go there. So I was with a different man, and there was nobody around to ask. We were sitting having coffee, and there was a man there. He said, "Well, ask him if he speaks, German." So I go over there, sprechen Sie Deutsch, and and he spoke to him in his German language, Yiddish German, and he said the place where the gold is right across the street where we're sitting.
Fantastic.
In this building. And the end result was it was closed for repairs.
Wonderful.
They go all the way there, and I never get to see it.
Oh, no.
That's the story.
Okay. Who's next?
Who's next? Oh. Sorry.
So we'll go to Janet. We'll go to Janice.
Okay, I haven't been to Greece, but I found this book in the library in Olean many years ago. I found this book in the library called I Remember Rhodes, and it was an autobiography from a woman about up until the war, and then it was rewritten. It was also in Ladino, and it was very interesting. And then, but what happened to Rhodes when the Nazis got there was pathetic.
Yeah, we're going to be. What happened to Rhodes when the Nazis got? We're going to talk all about that. We won't get to it this week. It'll be next week. We'll get up to the Middle Ages today.
As you know, I lived in Czech Republic for most of my life, and and I've been to Greece many times, to many islands, and I've seen some sites, Jewish sites. I didn't see any Jews there. I think there might be some in Thessaloniki. I don't know, but I was in Corfu, and there is a statue, like memorial for the Jewish community of Corfu. Very moving, family ready to be moved to a concentration camp in front of a synagogue which was closed because it was not Friday or Saturday. And then last year I was in Kos, and in the city of Kos, which is the main city of the island, I was looking for Jewish presence there, and there was just one sign saying, Jewish synagogue. So I walked, and there was nothing. And I tried to ask people, and nobody heard about synagogue, Jewish, nothing, nobody knew. So I don't think there is any much of presence there.
My wife and I were on a cruise, the Mediterranean, and the stops were at Rhodes and in Greece. And in Greece, we stopped at the port of Piraeus. Piraeus, I guess it is called. That's the port for Athens. And we toured the port, and then we drove into Athens and saw the sites, the Parthenon, and all the other relics, basically. And so we never got involved with the synagogue, unfortunately, but, huh? You have to find it. Well, anyway, the point was that all we saw was the historical sites for Athens, and we spent 2 days, one overnight in Piraeus, and then came back to Athens, and that was it.
Okay, great. All right.
Did you want to say one more thing?
Just a little more from my recent, when I worked for the Shoah Foundation, I worked there processing the testimonials, and all of them were saying that I was listening to Czech and Slovak testimonials. All of them were saying that when Greek Jews came to Theresienstadt, they just died so quickly because they were not used for the rough winter and cold and everything. It was very hard.
Okay, thank you for all those. That's great. So, when we're talking about the Jews of Greece, we have basically a third population that has a special name that we have not talked about yet, and that we generally don't talk about because it is specific to Greece. And these are called the Ramoniot. So there are 3 groups of Jews throughout Greece's history that have lived in Greece. The Ramoniot are Greek-speaking Jews from the Roman Empire who are distinct from Sephardic Jews coming from Spain and Portugal, and also Ashkenazic Jews coming from Eastern Europe mostly. So this is a third population that we Very nice. Thank you. I left mine in the car because I was running out. Yes. Warren, is that better? Okay. So this is a third distinct group that is specific only to Greece. And they came over pretty much in the 4th century. What happened in the 4th century? Okay, good. No, that's the, yes, yes, yes. Okay, that's much later. So I'm asking you, what happened in the 4th century? So one of the things that I like to do, hopefully, as we are progressing through this, is to give you markers, so that when you hear 4th century, it goes ding, 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 ding. Okay, so the 4th century are what, Janice? The 4th century the Romans left England. Okay. You know what? I threw you off. The 4th century BCE, not the 4th century CE. So, my fault, I didn't clarify. What happened in the 4th century BCE? What years are the 4th century BCE? The 300s, okay? As we have been talking about Jewish history, what's going on in the 300s? 300 BCE. Babylonian captivity is the temple is destroyed in 586. Babylonian captivity is 586 to 539. Any other ideas? Okay, so 4th century BCE, 300s BCE, Alexander the Great marches through the ancient world and conquers vast amounts of territory. This is huge. Why is it huge? Because Alexander the Great and his armies bring Greek thought and Greek culture to everywhere that they conquer. And the term in our tradition is Hellenization. Hellenization. And so everywhere Alexander the Great conquered, he brought Greek ideas and he brought Greek culture. Judaism never had something called Jewish philosophy. We definitely have it now, and it's very important. The greatest of the medieval philosophers, Maimonides, Judaism never had such a thing. How did we get it? We got it probably as a result of Islam. Where did Islam get it? As a result of the Greeks. So all these works from Aristotle, from Socrates, etc., were co-opted, the ideas somewhat into Islam, and then we got it from Islam. The story of Alexander the Great is huge. And the biggest way that it influences Jewish tradition, this is the story in 165 BCE, a little bit later, of the Maccabees. So, when Alexander the Great dies, he has 5 generals, and his entire empire, is divided among 5 generals. The 2 largest, most powerful generals were named Ptolemy and Seleucus. Seleucus basically gets the eastern half of the empire. Ptolemy gets the western half of the empire, which includes Egypt and what is now Israel. And remember, we talked about this earlier. Israel is super, super duper important. Why? Because it sits at the crossroads to everything. Everybody wants Israel because it's right there in the center, of trade routes, how you get to them, everything. Okay, so Ptolemy has the western half, Seleucus has the eastern half. Seleucus wants Israel. Seleucus goes into Israel and tries to conquer it. This is what the Maccabees are fighting against, because Seleucus takes the Temple Mount and does sacrilege there. So the Maccabees come back and they rededicate the temple, and that's our holiday of Hanukkah. The other really important part of the story, which we don't talk about so much, is that the Maccabees were fighting the Greek Seleucids externally, but they were fighting an internal war as well. What were they fighting an internal war? The Greek culture had spread to aristocratic Jews. Not only were they adopting Greek customs, they were taking Greek last names. Even some of them were starting to worship the Greek gods. The Maccabees were a small country purist sect of priests. And they said, no, Jews don't do that. Stop it. So they were fighting the war against the elite Jews who were becoming assimilated Greeks, and they were fighting the external war against the Seleucids, the Greek Seleucids. Okay, as we all know, Ptolemy's situation on the west, that's we talked about this when we had Egypt. That's where we get the Greek pharaohs, the last of whom was Cleopatra, the one that you know with Mark Antony. She's the last Greek pharaoh. Okay, so the Ramoniotes, these Jews, come to Greece during Alexander the Great's expansion. As he unites all that territory, Jews start to move into Greece. So they have been there for 2,000 years. They spoke a language, a separate language, which was called Yevanic, and it was a dialect of Greek. Unfortunately, it's now a dead language. There are no speakers of it any longer, but we know that there were. It was the language of that Greek Jewish population. Today, Greek Jews, and that's what we call the Ramoniate, Greek Jews as opposed to Sephardic Jews or Ashkenazic Jews, they speak Greek. And they are absolutely distinct in customs and language, obviously, and from the Sephardim, who come later after the expulsion from Spain and Portugal. The largest community of them in present times is in Ionian. And they had a huge population in Thessalonica at one point, which we'll get into. But now, there are only, last count, 35 of them. Most of these Ramoniote Greek Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, as well as most of all the other Greek Jews, as well as all the other Jews in Greece. Yes, you're correct. So, as we just said, the Sephardic Jews come over after the expulsion from Spain and Portugal. And remember that after that expulsion, Jews basically take two routes. They either go east into Europe, or they go down and around into northern Africa and ultimately Turkey. These Jews found their way to Greece, and they settled mostly in Thessalonica. And these Jews named Thessalonica the mother of Israel because it was such a huge Sephardic Jewish population there. And they spoke Ladino. We are still during the starting in the 4th century and moving towards the first centuries. So we're starting in 4th century BCE, around 300 BCE, all the way up to around 300 CE. And then we're going to have something else that goes in. So someone tell me about Ladino. Who knows anything? If Cecil were here, he could probably tell us a little bit about Ladino, I think. But it's a combination of Hebrew and Spanish. Very good. Yes, it is. And basically, scholars refer to it as Judeo-Spanish. Did you want to?
I do. I was going to bring it over to her. I do have a comment or a question. You discussed, and everyone knows, how the Greek culture influenced the Jews in Israel to the point where maybe it was taken over. How then could the Jewish culture exist in Greece itself when the tendency to assimilate would be even greater?
Yes, there definitely is that. So the question became these Ramoniotes, how traditional were they? Once they were in Greece, they were able to more or less keep Judaism alive. They did not assimilate in the way that the wealthy Judean Jews had done. So they were able to have a distinct Jewish community. They were not assimilated into the rest of the population. Ladino is what we call Judeo-Spanish. It is, as you correctly pointed out, a combination of Hebrew and Spanish. In the same way that Yiddish is a combination of Hebrew and German and some Slavic influences as well. I'm sorry? Yes, and German. Yes. And so but Ladino came well before Yiddish. So Ladino was spoken by the Jews who were living in Spain and Portugal before the expulsion. When they were expelled, they brought Ladino to the other places where they migrated to. Ladino now, spoken by some communities in Israel pretty much, but otherwise kind of dead. So the first mention that we get of Jews anywhere in Greece is around 300 BCE on Rhodes, and we have a man named Hyrcanus, who's the leader of the Athens Jewish community, and he's honored with a statue. So that's our first mention. We have a Jewish guy who's honored between 300 and 250 CE. He's a big macher in the town, and they honor him with a statue. Okay, great. The other reference that we have early to Jews in Greece comes from Josephus. So someone tell me about Josephus. Scholar and military person who traveled with the Roman army. So, thank you, sir. Thank you, Jim.
He wrote History of Jews or something.
Yes, yes. So, very good. So,
And
Josephus.
the Jewish War also.
Jewish Wars, exactly. And also a third book, Against Apion, which we're going to look at today. So Josephus is considered probably the greatest and only really historian of ancient Judaism. There are some others, Philo of Alexandria and others, but Josephus is the biggie. Josephus lives during the 1st century. So the very last part of the BCEs and the very beginning of the CEs. And yes, he traveled with the Roman army, and he gave us reports of what was going on. So for instance, what we know about Masada is from Josephus. And Josephus also wrote about everything that occurred before he was alive. He talked to people, he looked at the legends, he looked at what the oral history was, and he wrote several major works. He wrote first, let me show you here. He wrote first a book called Jewish Antiquities. And Jewish Antiquities starts from creation to the death of Isaac, and it ends with departure out of Babylon. Okay, so this is his big work called Jewish Antiquities. Then he wrote a set of books called The Jewish War. What were the Jewish wars? They were the wars that the Jewish zealots were fighting against Roman occupation. And Masada is right there in the First Jewish War. Then he wrote a book called Against Apion. So I want to read a tiny bit from Against Apion, because here is the mention of the first Jews in Greece. Let's see what's a good place to start here. And thus does, I guess it's Charillus, make mention of this. But now that not only the lowest sort of the Grecians, but those that had in the greatest admiration for their philosophic improvements among them, did not only know the Jews, but when they lighted upon any of them, admired them also. It is easy for anyone to know. For Clearchus, who was the scholar of Aristotle and inferior to no one of the Peripatetics, in his first work concerning sleep, says that Aristotle, his master, related what follows of a Jew, and sets down Aristotle's own discourse with him. The account is this, as written down by him. Now, for a great part of what this Jew said, it would be too long to recite it, but what includes in it both wonder and philosophy, it may not be amiss to discourse of. Now that I may be plain with you, Hyperochides, I shall herein seem to you to relate wonders and what will resemble dreams themselves. So I just wanted to give you a little taste of Josephus. This is a name you should know, Josephus. This is the great biblical historian in Jewish tradition. And he writes about a Jew in his time in Greece. His time is the 1st century. Yes? That's a really good question. Did he write
The question is, did Josephus write in Latin or Hebrew? Because he was pretty conversant in Hebrew. No,
Yeah.
he wasn't. Aramaic, I'm sorry.
You
Maybe
know
it was
what?
Aramaic.
I don't know. Or if someone wants to look that up, I'm going to have to find that out. I don't
And-
know.
And that's the other question is, didn't he rewrite the Torah? Did he do that?
No.
He didn't.
Not-
I thought I.
Wasn't he considered, Josephus considered a traitor?
Kind of yes. Kind of yes. Because he was very friendly to the Romans and the Roman emperor. He wasn't against the Jews, but he was very sympathetic to the Romans. It could be partially because it was the pragmatic thing to do. If you wanted to stay alive and have a good life, you didn't create problems. And the Jews were creating all kinds of problems for Rome. He wanted to write the history of the Jews, yes. So at the time, starting in the 2nd century, there were 2 synagogues, one in the Agora of Athens. Agora means a big open meeting place where they could have assemblies, and also one in Delos, which you'll see is a small island on the southeast coast. Okay, so Alexander the Great then marches through the ancient world, and the Jews of Alexandria, if you'll remember our map of Egypt, Alexandria is on the northern coast of Egypt. The Jews of Alexandria are able to sort of fuse Jewish and Greek culture, like what you were talking about before.
No, it's on
No.
the Mediterranean.
Northern coast. Yeah. Yes. And what happens is when Alexander dies, as we just talked about, there was great turbulence. And they were trying to figure out, well, who's going to take over now? We talked about the generals just a moment ago, and they end up taking over. But that's not a quick thing. There's fighting, there's infighting, there's all kinds of problems. And that goes on very clearly until the 2nd century. And with that turbulence comes, according to some scholars, the emergence of Jewish messianism. Does that anybody know about Jewish messianism? What does that mean? Say again? Return of the Messiah.
Well, the concept of the Messiah, I think.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
So Jewish messianic movements are Jewish movements that focus on the idea of Messiah. Now, in today's world, the bell that goes off in your head are Jews for Jesus. Absolutely. Jews for Jesus, they have the right to believe anything they want. However, they're not Jews according to our tradition. They are not normative Jews, meaning they are not Jews by what everybody considers to be a Jew. They consider themselves Jews, but no Jews consider them as Jews. They are Jews for Jesus, as well as when the Nazarenes follow Jesus in the during Jesus' lifetime in the 1st century CE, they were a Jewish messianic movement as well, because at the end they embraced. They didn't at the beginning, and Jesus didn't at the beginning. But at the end, Jesus and his followers did embrace that he was the Messiah. So do the Jews for Jesus today follow all the Jewish holidays? For the most part, yes. So they consider themselves Jewish. Absolutely, they consider themselves Jewish. And this was, I have a very good friend who is a Messianic rabbi. So, and he's going through the doctoral program at Spertus, just like me. And so we talk about scholarly stuff all the time. We don't talk about Jesus because we both know, look, I'm not going to agree with you. You're not going to agree with me. It's cool. And so I sent him pictures. This is what our Purim looked like. Oh, wow, that looked great. Blah, 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 blah. That kind of thing. However, as I said, the bottom line is we should know Jews for Jesus are not considered Jews by anybody except themselves. Okay.
So, Rabbi, I have a question. What happened to the Jews that were like in Greece already, and Paul was there trying to convert him?
We're
were
coming.
They converted?
We're coming.
You're getting there. Okay.
We're getting there.
I think that if there are among Jews for Jesus, Jews who were born to a Jewish mother, they must be considered Jewish even though they are Jews for Jesus.
Okay, great.
With wrong idea.
Very good, very good. So this brings up a very sticky issue. I won't spend a lot of time with it because, but it's an important issue to talk about because it involves all of us. So the point you bring up is very, very good. Suppose you are a Jew by birth, meaning your mother is Jewish, but you are a Messianic Jew who believes Jesus is the Messiah. Are you Jewish? And this is the same question that comes up for all of us because in our families, we have people who have converted to another religion. I mean, it happens all the time. And so the question is, are they still Jewish? And so the answer is, halachically, they are still Jewish. Yes, they are. However, more and more, especially in modern times, the practice has been more to, okay, maybe they're halakhically Jewish, but we don't extend to them the same privileges that Jews have. Meaning, I had a bar mitzvah probably a decade ago. The sister of the mother of the daughter, the aunt, the sister of the mother of the daughter who had a bat mitzvah. Her sister had converted to Mormonism. And so the mother's question was, I don't know what to do here. Should I invite her up? What do we do? And I said, well, I bet it's not going to be a problem. I bet she's not going to want to come up in the first place for an aliyah. And secondly, I'm not comfortable giving her an aliyah. So we have to figure out something else. Why am I not comfortable giving her an aliyah? Because she has to recite two prayers. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. One who has chosen us out and given us the Torah. Well, for her, that's not true. And the one after, Asher natan lanu Torah, the one who has given us, for her, none of those things is true. So she is saying a blessing to God for something which is false. And that's not okay with me. Could she just open the curtain? Yeah. I mean, usually what happens with someone like that is they are given to read the prayer for the country or something like that. Something like that. Okay. So there was... So what actually happened? The sister did not want recognition. Yeah, because not only is it false for her from our side, she's a Mormon. She wouldn't come up and partake in a Jewish ritual any more than I would go into a church and take the wafer and the wine and do Eucharist. Right? I mean, I have no problem sitting in a church, worshiping with people, and when we get to anywhere where it's Jesus, I substitute God and we're okay. But I would never stand up and go for... None of us would. So, okay. So there was a lot of turbulence, and it led to Jewish messianic movements coming into being. Why did they come into being in a moment of turbulence? Because for Jews, it has always been, in moments of great turbulence, the world is coming to an end. It can't get worse than this. The Messiah is coming. And we see that all through our history. We're going to see that into the first century. That's how Jesus' situation came about. We were under Roman occupation. Rome had its thumb on us. Caiaphas, the high priest, was running traditional Judaism from the synagogue. There were sacrifices being made, etc. But we were oppressed in a big way. We couldn't study Torah. We couldn't do anything. So, for some Jews, the idea of a Messiah was very appealing. And this has happened throughout history. We're going to find that later on when we get to Shabbatai Tzvi, etc. That Messianism was one way that some Jews were expressing their Judaism. So recall that during the Second Temple period, which extends from 536 BCE, when the Jews are brought back from Babylon, all the way up to 70 CE, when the temple is destroyed by the Romans, so that's a very long period, there were a number of ways that you could say you were Jewish, right? We had Pharisees, we had Sadducees, we had the Zealots, and so there were a number of groups, and people would say, I identify as a Jew with the Sadducees. I identify as a Jew with the Pharisees. I identify with the Jew as the Zealots or the Essenes. I identify as a Jew by virtue of being an Essene. And then, as I've said many times, I think we need to include the fifth little group in there. Josephus only gives us 4, but I think it should include the Nazarenes. So they were a Jewish messianic movement of their time. And those Jews who looked to Jesus as their rabbi, and they did look to him as their rabbi, and they called him rabbi, they thought of themselves as completely Jewish. They were just embracing a different form of Judaism. Just like if I were a zealot, I was embracing that expression of Judaism. So you had many, many, many different ways. And so this turbulence created by the death of Alexander the Great and the fight for control of his empire, especially among Ptolemy and Seleucus, provides an opening that Jews are, we don't know what's going on. Everything is in turmoil. Who's the leader? Who's governing us? The world is coming to an end. And Jewish messianism begins to flourish to some degree. Okay, let's just do one more piece because we're just about up with time. So in 146 BCE, 146 BCE, the Romans defeat the Greeks at Corinth, the Battle of Corinth. And now we have the beginnings of the Roman Empire. So remember, each empire comes after and destroys the one before it. When the one before it expands too far, it can't control the outlying territories, and it begins to implode from within. And this happens to every single empire that we have studied, starting with the Assyrians. And then the Babylonians take them over because they expanded too far, and Sennacherib had a problem on the throne, remember? And after the Babylonians, right? So each empire does this to the one that succeeds it. It happened with the Holy Roman Empire that we studied as well. So in 146, Alexander's empire falls to Rome. The Jews of Thessalonica did not participate in the first Jewish war. That was done by Judean Jews. So the Zealots who were fighting the Roman occupation, specifically This was 66 to 73 BCE is the first Roman war. 73 BCE is Masada. The Jews of Thessalonica were Hellenized, and as we talked about, they were distinct from Judean Jews. Okay, so that brings us up to Paul. Paul is, we got to spend a few minutes on Paul. Paul's really important. So let's wait until next week, and I'll start with Paul next week, and we'll go from there, and then finish the Jews. Hopefully, we'll finish the Jews of Greece. There's a lot to talk about here. All right, everybody, have a great week, and I will see you next week. Yes. You are welcome.
Mention your brother in Miami Beach. Can you say a little story about Miami Beach?
Sure.
I'm a civil water engineer.
Uh-huh.
I got a master's in it, so my professor and advisor at grad school was well noted. He told a story about how in the city of Miami Beach, for tourism, and clean beaches is very important. There was a complaint about dirt on the beach, and particularly condoms on the beach.
Okay.
And so they thought, well, I guess we're going to have to extend the sewer outfall. And so they hired a consultant. Then the chief engineer of the city went along the beach and talked with people, and he realized that the things they found were above the high tide mark. And so they canceled the project because it wasn't needed. The point was you got to do things in a sequential order. You got to plan things first.
Yes.
I have a toy question. So I'm going to call Cantor Mark. What chords would you play for Diana? What key would you play? I don't have music for this, but here's what chords you put on the guitar with it. Hi, Jim. Hello. I don't know if I have an email address. I'm limited to chords, but I just wanted to.
Sure. Santorini is included among the islands in the South Pacific. A real pain in the tuchus. Oh my goodness.
No, you are so good. But sometimes people have more to say, and it's not just a question. And we're training them, you know? Hi.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, we didn't sing happy birthday to Herb. Can we do it now? We got to do that. Okay. Herb is 99 today.
No,
Friday.
Friday. Is he online right now?
Yes. Are you there? Yes, he is.
Herb, you're online right now. We got to sing happy birthday. Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Herb. Happy birthday to you. And now we have to do Birkat Kohanim for him. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasim lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and protect you, Herb. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his face upon you and give you peace and health and happiness and many more years. And we say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. Hello, everybody who's at home live streaming. We will not be able to switch to Zoom today. There has been too much, there have been too many issues with Wi-Fi. And so please do not click off live stream. Please stay on live stream. And don't worry, the only thing that you're going to miss if you're at home and you can't see the screen are pictures of people who are no longer around in this world. So you'll learn about them, but you just won't see the pictures. What we'll do is we will get a copy of that PowerPoint so that Susie can send it to everybody in the class. And then if you didn't get to see the guy with the very long sideburns from the 1800s, you'll be able to see it when it gets to your house. I'm way past Washington Bartlett, but I can move ahead from that. Thank you very much. There we go. Full screen it. There we go. We could go slide only. Okay. Great. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody who's on live stream is still on live stream, and all of you who are live here. We probably have more people at home on live stream than we generally do because, boy, this rain has been beyond.
There are plenty of live streams out there.
So Jim can tell you, live streams out there. Jim can tell you when we were at Minyan yesterday morning, I basically said to people, okay, stop saying Mashiv Haruach Umorid Agashem. We don't want to have any more wind and any more rain. God is just going to have to be okay with stopping this before Pesach. So I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but personally, we already have had the flood and the parting of the seas in some of our neighborhoods, getting ready for Pesach. Did everybody get snacks? Are we ready to go? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Let's say the blessing for learning together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And so even that is about water, la'asok. So good morning, everybody. We're still on learning about some of the people who made California Jewry happen. And today we're going to be mostly discussing people
who were involved in the development of Los Angeles. However, oh no, poor bird. We should open the doors. Hold on a second. How did that bird get in here?
It's not going to find the open door, I don't think. It hasn't left from up there. Have to call him by his name.
I would hate to see a little birdie lose its life in here.
Right up there.
I know that California Jewish history matters to all of us, but Sar Bali Chaim, caring for the life of animals and beings, counts too. Yes?
So are we ever going to have a chance to get to the Jews of the Gold Country, please?
Yes.
Okay.
Why?
Well, I know you're leaving early, so I just thought you may not.
No, we'll definitely be getting there. So we'll do what we can do today, but today we're going to be talking about people from Los Angeles, but I wanted to start with this guy who never lived in Los Angeles, Solomon Bibo, because he is quite amazing. Are we going to all be listening to the birdie the whole time? So, we talked a little bit about things that were happening in San Francisco with Chinese people and the troubles that they had that Jews weren't necessarily having. But we didn't talk about the fact that during this very period of time, the mid 1800s, a whole lot of things are happening to Indian tribes in the area. So virtually every Indian tribe in North America found contact with white settlers very painful, if not fatal. And only a few Indians trusted any of those or respected any of those people, much less loved those people at all. One exception to this generalization was Solomon Bibo, a white trader who won the trust and affection of the Acoma Pueblo Indians. Now, this happened in New Mexico, but I included him because he moved to San Francisco and was later buried in Colma, but I thought you would enjoy hearing his story. In 1888, Don Solomono, as he was known to the Acomas, became governor of the Acoma Pueblo, the equivalent of the chief of the tribe. And the Acomas asked the United States to recognize Bibo as their leader. Even more remarkable was the fact that Solomon Bibo was, of course, because this is what we're discussing, a Jew. So he was born in Prussia in 1853, the sixth of 11 children. In 1866, 2 of his brothers came to America and settled in New Mexico, which had just become part of the United States after being a Spanish colony. They worked for obviously another Jewish family, the Spiegelberg family, who were pioneer Jewish merchants in New Mexico, but he moved to the tiny village of Ceboleta, where they set up a trading post to exchange goods with the Navajos. At the age of 16, Solomon Bibo himself left Germany for America and went to the East Coast, but ended up then with his family on the West Coast. All of them developed reputations for being really fair in their dealings with local Indian tribes, who used to bring the Bibos the farm produce they grew. And Bibo, under contract to the United States government, supplied the army forts with all the things that they needed. And the Indians, who were generally not paid a really good price for anything they provided, were paid a very fair and great price by Solomon Bibo, who included them. So they became also involved in mediating disputes over land ownership and over being there. I don't like sitting down. And they also had to negotiate with the Mexicans because the Mexicans who were in the area also were not very friendly to Indians, and they wanted to take over Indian land as well. So as you can imagine, what was happening to these Indian tribes was really dire, because here was the American government at that time trying to take control, and on the other side, the Mexican population trying to get control. So the Bibos interceded with the Anglos to make sure that they didn't try to buy Indian goods at anything less than market prices. So none of the Bibos became more endeared to Indians than Solomon was to the Acomas. He arrived at the Pueblo, set up a trading post. He learned their language and helped them fight legal battles. By 1877, the Acomas had been granted 94,000 acres of land by the U.S. government. You have no idea how important that was, because very often, as we know, the tribal lands were taken, and then when the tribal lands were taken, they were given not very much square footage for the places that they could live and hunt. But because of Solomon Bibo, a Jew, they got that much land. And they were determined that they were not going to lose any more land. So they decided to offer Bibo a 30-year lease to their land, in exchange for which he would pay them $12,000, protect their cattle, keep squatters away from their coal mines, and pay them a royalty. So does anybody understand, I'm sure you all do, how significant this was? The shame of it is that the Acomas had to have a white man help them, defend them. But the joy of it is that the person that they got to do it was somebody who completely lived on ethics and actually taught Jewish ethics to the tribe, not in an attempt to convert them from their natural religions or beliefs, but instead to make them understand that not everybody that they would deal with who was not native was going to be evil or not have a value system. So one guy, a U.S. Indian agent from Santa Fe, New Mexico, learned about the deal that the tribe had with Bibo and got jealous of it and put out there all of these terrible things about the rico Israelito, the rich what? Jew. And tried to get the federal government to void the lease that was really good for the tribe. But they fought back. They went to Washington, D.C., and because the people in the tribe loved him and his family and convinced the government that that Bibo had acted honorably, he got to stay in contact with the tribe and take care of them. He married an Acoma woman, and she was the granddaughter of the predecessor of the head of the tribe. She was originally a Catholic, but she converted to Judaism and observed the Jewish faith and raised her children as Jews all the rest of her life. In 1898, because they wanted their children to have a Jewish education, they relocated to San Francisco, where he invested in real estate and opened a fancy food shop and all of that. Their oldest son, an Acoma, was bar mitzvah at San Francisco's Ohabe Shalom synagogue. And the younger one attended religious school at Temple Emmanuel. He died in 1934 and she in 1941. And he was buried with his Indian princess in the Jewish cemetery in Colma, California. What? The site? Which cemetery? Where's Colma? Oh, we talked about that a little bit, I think, last week when we were together. But it is just out of San Francisco a little bit. And I think I mentioned that Colma has more non-living people as citizens of the town than living people as citizens of town. It's got tons of cemeteries, but the Jewish community in the 1800s were smart enough to purchase several different plots of land, so there are several different Jewish cemeteries. And what's significant about that, which I'll just throw in, is that many, many Jewish cemeteries nowadays are not owned by the Jewish community. They're owned by corporate cemetery companies. And so the Jewish parts of the cemetery, yes, they're Jewish and they go by the rules, but ultimately it's not Jews themselves who own the overall property. Eden is one of them, yes. Sinai is not, because Sinai Temple is owned by, it's completely owned by Jews. But, okay, so. What? Hillside I don't know about.
I think it's owned by Wilshire Boulevard. I think it's Wilshire Boulevard. Wilshire Boulevard.
I don't know. Is it Stephen S. Wise? Is it Leo Beck? Is it Temple Emmanuel? Yes. Okay. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on Jacob Frankfurt, but I wanted to lead you back in time a little bit. Gary, it's a really good question about when is our next class? Are we next week, right? Right. So I hope that next week we'll be starting on Motherlode. Yeah. There should be plenty of opportunity. Okay. So Jacob Frankfurt is one of the guys, I hope maybe you can see that. I don't know if you can. Can you see the screen at all? Yes. Okay. So he's one of the guys who was amongst the first to be listed in a census in the city, in the pueblo of Los Angeles. He arrived in 1841, part of the Roland Workman Exploratory Party that came from Santa Fe, New Mexico. We learned already about him a little bit when we were talking about the first guys who came to Los Angeles. However, what I want you to know about Jacob Frankfurt, he was a tailor and he owned a rifle. Why was that important? He became the most important person in the exploratory party that brought him to Los Angeles. Why? Well, he's a tailor. So why is that important?
A rifle and a tailor?
Okay. People were on these, wagons and their ways of getting across land. Things fell apart all the time, which harkens back to Levi Strauss, right? And having to create clothing that was actually sturdy. They didn't have sturdy clothing. These people had come from other places where they weren't in the middle of dirt and dust and travel all the time. So Jacob Frankfurt became tremendously important because people's clothes were falling off their body and he could fix them. But why the rifle rather than a musket? Many people had guns, but they were muskets, like these old-fashioned guns that didn't go very much of a distance. Well, if you're on the road in a wagon and you are building a campfire every night, what do you need? Food. So he was the one who helped to provide most of the food that they had to shoot along the way. He was listed, he was a wealthy guy. He was listed as being owed $400 in a declaration of bankruptcy by the mayor, Rafael Gallardo, of Los Angeles in 1845. So he loaned money and he was owed money. And he acted as an appraiser during 1846 when a brigantine, is that what it's called? A ship, the Ascension from Peru, was beached in San Pedro Harbor. He was appointed the appraiser at the harbor, indicating the last thing that's important about him and other Jews. They were literate. They were well educated. He opened his tailor business and men's clothing store, and this you know about, on Bell's Row. Remember where all those guys lived? And everybody coming into Los Angeles had to go by Bell's Row. That he did that as well. So it was Jacob Frankfurt who loaned the money to Henry Mellis to purchase Bell's Row from Captain Alexander Bell. So unfortunately, we don't have any picture of him, but we do have the census that's up on the board. And we already talked about who these first guys were, so we're going to move on from that. Let's go to our next wonderful person. Joseph Goodman. We'll see. You got the Joseph right. Oh, Joseph Goodman. So maybe it was one of your ancestors, Ernie.
I doubt it, but it's an interesting thought.
Okay, look at this guy. I told everybody at home that all you would be missing is pictures of people with big sideburns and beards. So there he is. He was the first early unofficial rabbi of our city of Los Angeles. He was born in Prussia in 1799, and in 1818, at 19 years of age, he was trained as a shochet, a ritual slaughterer. We just talked about the guy who shot the food. Now we're talking about the guy who did it in the Jewish way. Together, his first wife and he had 2 children before her early death. They went to New York City, and he founded a synagogue that's still in existence, B'nai Jeshurun. Anybody ever been there in Manhattan? A very wonderful congregation, Ashkenazic congregation in the city. It was then known as the Elm Street Synagogue. He became a Mason in 1831 and a U.S. citizen in 1834. Now, the Mason part is pretty important because, well, the citizen part is important too, but the Mason part is important because during that period of time, it was a club that was really very open to Jews, and many, many, many Jews became Masons. Anybody here a Mason? What? Your husband was. So, women's of Mason. A lot of the symbols in the Masonic Lodge come from Torah. He traveled in the Midwest. His family left New York in 1852 and traveled around the Horn from New York to San Francisco. It was documented. His son documented that trip, and you can actually look up if you want to get transcriptions of what his son wrote on that trip. But Joseph Newmark was in poor health, and San Francisco wasn't the right place for him. So he moved south to Los Angeles in 1854, and he went into business with his nephews, Joseph and Harris, and another guy. The company was known as Newmark, Kremer and Company, a wholesale, guess what? Retail dry goods business, and he married his second wife. Together with his second wife, he had 6 children: Matilda, Mayer, Edward, Sarah, Caroline, and Harriet. Sarah married her cousin, Harris Newmark. Now, this is important because this Newmark family was crucial for the development of Jewish life in Los Angeles. Without them, it would have taken a lot longer to establish. So here we go with him. He became the lay leader of Los Angeles as well as its shochet until 1862, when he was instrumental in bringing Rabbi Abraham Wolf Edelman from San Francisco to lead Congregation B'nai B'rith, which is what? Wilshire Boulevard Temple. He was named the vice president of the congregation. He was also a founder of the Hebrew Benevolent Society, the first chartered Jewish charity, the first chartered charity of any kind in Los Angeles. They are the ones who bought the Chavez Ravine Cemetery that we talked about a few weeks ago. He had the honor also of performing the very first Jewish wedding in California. In California, not just Southern California. And he officiated at the weddings of his children. So he held the religious part of the Jewish community together until the first rabbi came. So we should value him for that. Yes. Okay, somebody go close the doors.
No, what will happen is when it gets dark and he sees light up there, probably fly to the light. He's just staying up there. He doesn't know what's going on.
So he's never going to get out of here, you're saying?
No, if you leave the door open at night, leave it light up.
Oh, okay. We'll do that. So this guy looks like a rabbi, right? So what we're seeing is Congregation B'nai B'rith there, the plaque from the very beginning of the synagogue. So he was the pioneer rabbi, and he was born in Poland in 1832. He came to the United States with his wife Hannah Pesach Cohen in 1851, and he married her in Warsaw, and together they had 6 children, back in the day when people had a lot of children. 8 years later, they were living in San Francisco, where Abraham seems to have spent his time continuing his Hebraic studies, teaching Hebrew, and for a time acting as a dry goods salesman. When Rabbi Abraham Wolf Edelman arrived in the pueblo of Los Angeles, it was, as we described near the beginning of the class, a really wild west frontier town. Do you remember what I told you about the ministers who were in town then? What happened to them? They were run out of town? I don't think they were run out of town, but they were so troubled by the kind of things that were going on in the town that they couldn't hold on to a minister in Los Angeles for anything in the world. But Wolf Edelman came when all of that was still going on, and he stayed. He was a great organizer, and himself, Joseph Newmark, who we did before, was a great organizer and the lay rabbi and a Judaic scholar, and he persuaded Rabbi Edelman to come to Los Angeles. He served Congregation B'nai B'rith from its inception in 1862 to 1885. And during that time, he was the Jewish spiritual leader of Los Angeles. Historical records show that he was a traditional Orthodox rabbi. And although this may not be accurate, because people didn't really know how to define what an Orthodox rabbi was when they were writing about it here in the wilds of California. You know how that is. It even still goes on today. You see somebody in a kippah and wearing a white shirt and black pants, and you assume, oh, that guy's got to be really, really Orthodox. But people don't necessarily have the right idea about all of that. There were two good reasons for Rabbi Edelman to be called to Los Angeles. What would the main reason have been? Thank you, Rosalie. Number one, the small community had a number of children who needed a teacher to help them maintain their ethnic and religious identity. And the adult Jews wanted a spokesman and an ambassador to help them in their religious and ethnic needs. So he became the face of Judaism in the area. Not a surprise, right? He fulfilled with dignity his role as spokesman and ambassador. He really did. He combined the offices of rabbi and cantor, though he never claimed ordination. So we don't know where Edelman, or if Edelman ever got his smicha from anybody or some organization, but he did a great job. Before coming to Los Angeles, he had never held a pulpit. And in those days, a cantor did not need an operatic voice, but he had to be skilled in liturgy being the prayers, and Edelman was. But here's the other part about him. He spoke Spanish and was soon dubbed Padre by the Spanish-speaking residents of this pueblo. So whose spiritual leader did he become? Everybody's spiritual leader. He joined many civic organizations, including the Masonic Lodge, and he donated to many charitable causes and did everything he could for the Jewish community and for the community at large. The Jewish community at his arrival, how many people do you think it was? By the 1850s. Yeah, it was 200 people. So here was the myth, the problem. He retired from his position in 1886, the victim of his own success and the growth of the Los Angeles community. He was eased out of his role under the cover of a myth. The myth was calculated to protect the congregation and spare the rabbi's feelings. Harris Newmark, the same guy, president of B'nai B'rith congregation, started the myth by saying that in 1885, when local Jewry instituted a much more liberal ritual, when Rabbi Edelman's convictions induced him to resign. Meaning the myth that he was a very Orthodox rabbi and the community was moving more in the liberal direction, that he didn't want to serve that. But it's not really necessarily true, because he had already showed signs of non-Orthodox inclination. He allowed mixed seating in the synagogue. He allowed a mixed choir. They had confirmation ceremonies. They had English prayers and sermons. So all of that was pretty well an indication that poor Rabbi Edelman was absolutely not the Orthodox rabbi that they cooked him up to be so that they could get rid of him. What? Because they wanted to go even more into a liberal direction than he probably was willing to take. In addition to that, the community had grown and expanded, and they wanted fresh blood. That's what happened.
It happens a lot
okay, so they shelved him. They still loved what they called old Edelman, but they shelved him. Yeah.
I just wondered if there was an influx of German Jews that had come in from maybe the East Coast that made, that wanted somebody with more liberal leanings, more reform leanings. I wonder if maybe that had an influence on what happened.
So, Rosalie, it's a good question, but most of the people who had already settled in the area, of those 8 people that we talked about who were the first eight, most of them came from Germany. Only a few of them from Poland. So it's potentially possible that because there were a mix of people in that congregation, that they wanted to push it more and more. But in that case, wouldn't Edelman have maybe moved on to the inception of another synagogue community for more traditional people? I think that, I don't know for sure, but I think that they thought 20 years was enough, and they wanted to move on. Probably. So he went and he served another congregation in Oregon, so he turned out okay. However, he started something that has been done by many rabbis all the way up to, what is his name, Rabbi Magnin, who used to be at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. Nobody made enough money as a rabbi in one of these earlier Los Angeles synagogue communities. So what did they do? They didn't have another job. They bought property. Edelman ended up purchasing something at the corner of 6th and Main Street. He erected a multi-story building. They supplied him with rents to supplement his salary. And get this, his estate, now middle 1800s, his estate, when he died, totaled $200,000. That was a lot of money, most of which this great guy designated for charity. So, anybody heard of the store for Harrison Frank?
So when did Rabbi Edelman pass away?
Well, let me check. I skipped over that. I don't know. I'll look and tell you, Gary. I don't want to use.
What?
1907.
There you go. Okay. So nobody's heard of Harrison Frank? Yeah. So first I want to show you Leopold Harris. We're getting to some really interesting stuff that Jews managed to do in Los Angeles. His name was really Lewin Herskowitz. He was born in Prussia, educated in Prussia, and was really a very well-educated, loved to read and study. He got to America in 1852 when he was 16 by way of Louisville, Kentucky. So I want you to know this because people got here all sorts of ways. He had a number of business ventures in San Francisco, in San Gabriel, in San Bernardino, and became a citizen. He decided that Los Angeles offered better business opportunities. So in 1870, he opened a stationery store that had been owned by a Hellman, and he established a retail men's clothing firm, Quincy Hall Clothing. Somebody's been just calling and calling and calling. Later, London Clothing Company. He was the first merchant in the city to establish a line of credit with New York. And that was really important because it paved the way for other merchants, Jewish and non-Jewish, in Los Angeles to be able to do that. His retail firm's name became Harrison Frank, and he brought on Herman Frank as a very trusted manager who did what that just about every person who came on board in somebody's company did? No, he didn't cook the books. He married the boss's daughter. Thank you, Jim. So by 1903, his two sons-in-law were running the business. He was the first in Los Angeles to erect buildings on long-term leases at the Allen Block, and he secured a 20-year lease, which was the first time that anybody had ever done that. And he made investments also in sheep. God knows why, but turned out to be what made him his fortune. He was an officer at B'nai B'rith congregation and gave to many charities in the city, both Jewish and non-Jewish, in such a manner that it wasn't until his death, when the support stopped, did anyone other than those directly sending the money to these organizations know that he was the one giving the major funds for philanthropy. He kept it all a secret. Harris what? I don't know. I'm wondering if something is wrong with, hold on. I'm teaching. I did. Okay. Bye. What? Yes, that's what it is. That's them. That's it. I don't know. But now let's get to Herman Frank. So he was born in Walla Walla, Washington. Where was Leopold Harris born? Prussia. So this tells you the generation changes that happened in Los Angeles, when people's son-in-laws were, for the most part, born more locally in the United States. That's how that started. At the age of 13, he went to work at his father's store, and then his father's store went bankrupt. So he went to work as an apprentice clerk in general merchandise in Weston, Oregon. So how did he become a great guy in terms of being the person to work with Leopold Harris and marry his daughter? He would write every item that got sold down on a piece of brown wrapping paper, and he wrote it again in a charge book in the evening, after dinner by candlelight, and then he would transfer it to a leather-bound book, and he would keep all of these records at the age of 16. 16. He is a good-looking guy. So he became a traveling salesman for a Steinhardt company in San Francisco. So he met Leopold Harris, who was doing business as the London Clothing Store. He sold Harris a very large order of merchandise. For a number of years, he continued to travel the West as a dummer. A dummer, I learned, is a traveling salesman. He heard that Leopold Harris was looking for a younger partner and wrote him, and he was accepted on probation, and he proved himself an exceptional worker. He became involved in a relationship with Sarah Harris. The wedding was held in 1888, and he made his son-in-law the general manager of the business, and they changed it to Harris and Frank. It was the first store to do a Christmas effect with its windows during the holidays. Isn't that ironic? They also owned a winery. He was involved in, both of them were involved in B'nai B'rith Synagogue, but Herman Frank served as the president of the Los Angeles Board of Education for 10 years, the president of United Charities, you know, that's the forerunner of the United Fund, and he founded the Jewish Big Brothers Association. So I know we've just been doing people, But without people, how would we understand what was really going on in any of these communities? These people, in my mind, deserve to be remembered, because none of us would be sitting here in the Jewish community that we're in, or actually in any of the business community that we live in, if it were not for them. So we know about the Jews who created everything in the film industry, right? And involved with music. Everybody knows, but everybody doesn't know, and now you do, that everybody doesn't know that these people created the city as well. So, as my beloved teacher in rabbinic school would say, weiter, moving onward. Look at this guy, another guy with a mustache or a beard. Solomon Lazard. This is very important. Very, very, very important. He was born in France, Alsace-Lorraine, in 1826. He was a cousin to the owners of Lazard Frères, then a leading import-export house, and today a French banking giant. He arrived in New York in 1844, where he was employed as a clerk at his family's business before going to New Orleans. And then he left New Orleans in 1848. Why? For California by way of the Isthmus of Panama. So now we've talked about people going under Cape, people going through the Isthmus, traveling across Lake Nicaragua, down to the Pacific, and then up to Yerba Buena, now San Francisco, on a steamer. He worked at branches of Lazard Frères in San Francisco, in San Jose, in Stockton, and then he purchased goods intending to open his own store in San Diego. The captain of the ship that he was on, that was heading south to San Diego, suggested that instead he settle in the little town of Los Angeles. The captain of the ship said, "I believe that that's where the growth is happening." And he was right. So Solomon Lazard's first Los Angeles store was in what row? Bell's Row in 1851, and he partnered later with his cousin Maurice Kremer. Because of their good reputation, Lazard and Kremer faced a problem soon to be followed by many Jewish merchants throughout the West. I talked about that problem once before. Customers wanted to do what? What? Nope, not the Saturday opening, but that comes up when we get to the gold rush, so stay tuned. What did we say? Jewish merchants were honest, for the most part, honest. They set up really good businesses, and inside their businesses, what did they have? Besides their goods. They had what? Yeah, well, thank you. It's not actually a bank, but they had safes. So customers, so many people in the community wanted to leave their extra gold and silver with a Jewish merchant for safekeeping, because they knew that it wouldn't get stolen. So S. Lazard and Company had a large new brick store built in 1866 on Main Street, which eventually became known as the City of Paris, after Lazard retired. Then, in 1852, he became a citizen of the United States. He was a lieutenant with the Los Angeles Guards, and he was elected as a delegate to the county convention of the Democratic Party and to the Los Angeles City Council. He served on the Committee on Police, the Committee on Streets, the Committee on Land. He was a member of the First Library Association, member of the Board of Chamber of Commerce, and this is what happened. This is the crazy thing that happened. In 1869, along with a guy named John Griffin and another guy named Prudence Beaudry, he took over the failing existing Civic Water Company. and received a 30-year lease from the city of Los Angeles. He was the president of the company. The company developed a major water supply system using iron pipes, most of which are still functioning under our streets today. After 30 years, the city of Los Angeles bought back the lease of the water company, and it became the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Come on. Like, where would we have ever learned this? This guy and his colleagues are responsible for the saving of the water system that became what we have now. It just floors me. Most of the money that he received from the sale of the water company was invested in the firm of Brownstein and Lewis, a Los Angeles apparel company that is best known for its invention of the sport shirt. The sport shirt. Which nobody is wearing right now, but I can guarantee you that when it gets to be the end of May, he married Carolyn Newmark. Newmark, a very important Los Angeles family, and the bride's father, Joseph Newmark, performed the ceremony. They had 10 children, and he died in 1916 and is buried at the Home of Peace Cemetery in Los Angeles. So, now, let's see, we have only a couple more guys. How much time do we have? Well, we're never going to get to the women, but we've got these two guys, and it's really important. So let me move on. Do these pictures help you at all? Isaiah Hellman. My son-in-law's last name is Hellman. Unfortunately, not a descendant of the banking company. Okay. So he was born in Bavaria. So see, Rosalie, I mean, so many people, they weren't Poles. So many of them were German or from other places in Europe that were not known to be, they were religious. It's not true that Germans weren't religious. It's just they weren't what you're thinking of, that kind of thing. He and his younger brother Herman left Europe for New York by steamer. From there, they took another steamer to the Isthmus of Panama. They crossed the isthmus by foot, donkey, and flatboat to the Pacific, where they waited for another steamer to take them up to San Francisco, and finally, one last steamer to take them south to Los Angeles in 1859. He became a U.S. citizen in 1867. He first worked at his cousin's store, and in 1865 opened his own dry goods store. Like Solomon Lazard before him, he had the problem of customers trusting him so much that they would leave their excess gold and silver with him for safekeeping. So he eventually had to have a large safe shipped from the east to hold all of this precious metal. He finally set off a part of his store as an unofficial bank, complete with printed deposit slips, becoming a Los Angeles unofficial banker. In 1868, he was part of Los Angeles's first official bank, Hellman, Temple and Company. But he was dissatisfied with his partner's liberal handing of lending money, so he dropped out and formed his own bank, the Farmers and Merchants Bank, and you can see that there, which became Los Angeles's first successful bank. He was a more conservative banker. He kept a strong reserve and lending money only to people whom he thought knew their business and had the skills to succeed. He lent money that allowed Harrison G. Otis to purchase the Los Angeles Times and Edward Doheny to drill successfully for oil around Southern and Central California. He also financed Henry Huntington, which led to many of Los Angeles inner city rail and trolley lines. He partnered with Huntington on the Pacific Electric Railway and the Los Angeles Railway during the turn of the last century. Do you get how important this person is? Isaiah Hellman's influence helped bring the Southern Pacific Railroad to Los Angeles in 1876, putting Los Angeles into the mainstream of California commerce and initiating the rapid expansion of Los Angeles from a small city to a major metropolis. He was a major landholder in Southern California. His holdings included numerous city lots and vast swaths of former rancho land. He bought Rancho Cucamonga. Did anybody ever listen to those old radio shows in the 40s and the 50s? And I listened to them all the time. And the people who wrote those comedy shows were always thought it was funny to have a train going and say, Rancho Cucamonga. Well, he actually bought Rancho Cucamonga, and later Rancho Los Alamitos, both in their entirety. Along with William Workman, he owned much of Boyle Heights and the Repetto Ranch with Harris Newmark, which today is Montebello. Listen to this. In 1879, he, along with some other civic-minded citizens, gave the land for the founding of the University of Southern California. He was the president of Congregation B'nai B'rith when the congregation built the city's first synagogue on 4th Street. He brought Rabbi Schreiber to Los Angeles from Denver to be the second rabbi of Congregation B'nai B'rith. He was a regent of the University of California, a position that he held till 1918. He married Esther Nugas of New York, and this brought Isaiah into the Lehman family of New York bankers, and they had 3 children. What do you think?
I think Silicon Valley Bank ought to follow some of this.
Yeah, they should have been as careful as he was. Huh? We're going to close with Emil Harris. He was born in Prussia. Now we're getting very used to that. In 1839, and he came to the U.S. in 1853 and to L.A. in 1869. When the Turnverein, the German Athletic Association of Los Angeles, was opened in 1870, Emil Harris became its gymnastics instructor. Many Jewish boys learned physical culture from him. They also had a rifle team, and he soon became the champion rifle marksman of Southern California. In 1870, he became a Los Angeles policeman. Guess how many Los Angeles policemen there were in 1870? How many? 6. Close, Gary. During the Chinese massacre riots of 1871, he did his best to protect the Chinese from the anti-Chinese mob and was trusted thereafter by the Chinese community. Jewish merchants loved him because he watched over their stores and conversed with them in Yiddish. In 1874, he led the posse that captured robber murderer Tibucurio Vasquez, who was threatening Los Angeles. He was promptly hanged, and Emil Harris became a household name. He was also a first-rate detective. The press had full confidence that he could solve any crime, and they were almost always right. He was appointed the chief of police for Los Angeles in 1878. Later, after stepping down as chief, he started his own private detective agency, becoming one of Los Angeles' first gumshoes, Private Eye. Soon after his arrival in Los Angeles, he helped to create the first volunteer fire department the city had. He was also a member of Congregation B'nai B'rith. And he also was part of founding the YMHA in Los Angeles. He passed away in 1921. Sorry, can't go backwards like that. Okay, what time is it? Okay, so we're done. We've now covered the movers and shakers in San Francisco and environs, the movers and shakers in Los Angeles and environs, and what did we learn before we go? What have we learned by learning the individual stories of all these different people? Yeah, the absolute foundation of Los Angeles and also San Francisco and the Bay Area. Anything else? Founders of the Jewish community. Anything else with regard to the way people in the community looked at them? Yeah. Very, very, very charitable. Ethical in business. And trusted by people who didn't trust anybody else.
You know, I'm a native Angelino, and I know that there were a lot of department stores that developed in the central city, you know, like Robinson's and May Company. And I, you know, as a child, you know, I went to these stores and I think the Jews founded these department stores. And then, of course, it tore them down. And you know, like Macy's moved in and all, and I guess Macy's, I don't know who founded Macy's in New York and then came out here. But the Jews are very instrumental in creating these major department stores in the Los Angeles area, in the central city, around 7th Street. Not 6th, but 7th Street.
Right. That's absolutely true. Remember that what happened with regard to the status of Jews, and we talked about that, but let me just reiterate for 1 minute and then we're done. What happened was when the influx of other people came to Los Angeles, people came from a number of different communities that really had no experience with Jews. And when they did, because they had no experience with Jews, they came with all of their preconceived notions, and things did change. But remember that I also said, when we had that problem in Los Angeles, it led to the creation of much stronger, specifically Jewish communities than they had in Northern California. So there are pros and cons. The pros of the equality and the lack of any kind of discrimination in Northern California, in the San Francisco area, led to, it's sad to say, but the truth is it led to much more assimilation in those communities, because anybody could live wherever they wanted to, go wherever they wanted to. There were no preconceived notions about clubs or anything like that. But here, when we were in a difficult situation, we rose to the occasion and built a community that has become a beautiful example of the pride of Judaism pretty much all around the world. So bad stuff led to good stuff. And that's it for today. And next week, get your cowboy boots on, or your muckraking boots, get your hats on, get ready with your shovels and your pick, because we're gonna go look for gold, folks.
Jews got together, so many